This is a true story about one boy's life, his family, and the tracts of land he came into this world and was raised on. About a small community called Skidmore, an area outside of Annapolis, Maryland, on the Broadneck Peninsula near the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Land that would always be his holy ground of his first impressions, experiences, and dreams. Before the Puritans continental settlers arrived in 1649, the Skidmore land was inhabited by the Sewasquees and for hundreds of years. Years later, in 1763, the governor of Maryland colony, Orlando Sharpey, purchased 814 acres of land on this part of the Broadneck Peninsula in order to build his own house because the Maryland legislature failed to provide him a suitable residence in Annapolis City. Governor Sharpey went on to build the Whitehall Mansion 10 years before the onset of the American Revolution. He subsequently developed a large farm plantation which included wheat, corn, sheep for wool, and broodline stock racehorses. In 1769, Lord Baltimore of England unexpectedly relieved Sharpey as governor of the colony after 16 years. In 1773, Sharpey set sail for England on family business, leaving power of attorney to his friend and former secretary John Rideout for conducting the business affairs for the Whitehall farm plantation. While still in England and with the continuation of the Revolutionary War, Sharpey sold his Whitehall farm plantation to John Rideout. John, his wife Mary Ogle, and his three children took possession of the Whitehall mansion in 1780. The Rideout family was to live at Whitehall for over a century. By the close of the American Revolution in 1783, there were 80 white families maintaining farms and plantations on the Broadneck Peninsula, and only 31 possessed slaves. John Rideout's plantation, now over 2,000 acres, had 38 slaves, most of them families. Although Maryland possessed some free black slaves, about 1,100, there is no evidence of any residing in Broadneck before the Revolutionary War. However, as the 18th century closed, conditions for slaves took a turn for the better, as many whites began to feel that slavery was wrong, spread across the eastern shore westward. So by 1860, the eve of the American Civil War, the Broadneck area had seen a great increase in the number of free blacks. With grants of freedom plus the birth of black children into freedom, there was around 900 free blacks in the Broadneck area before the start of the Civil War. However, Peninsula still had about 1,000 slaves who did most of the farm and household tasks, which kept free blacks' wages low. In 1900, Sylvester LeBrot, president of a huge company headquartered in New Orleans, began to assemble his 2,000-acre Holly Beach farm, an estate mansion on tracts of land right next to the Rideout family estate. Soon after World War II, when federal government wanted to use some of their estate land for an airfield to train Naval Academy Michigan, the Mock family made a partial donation of land to the state on the condition that the area should become a state park, now known as Sandy Point State Park. Gradually, Maryland did take over other pieces of land for the building of Route 5301 and the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Prior to the bridge, there was a ferry boat service from that point. Near Sandy Point, at the far end of Log Inn Road, lies the former site of the Log Inn, a former hotel restaurant. The Log Inn operated from 1913 to 1954. During the early years, the Log Inn was a favorite spot for congressmen escaping the watchful eyes of big city presses. Famous guests included Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, and Hollywood celebrities. Most of the labor who operated were the Skidmore blacks. The area now known as Skidmore consists of Colbert Road, Cars Road, Log Inn Road, and Yorktown Road, along both sides of US 5301, leading up to the eastbound lanes of the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. These roads make up the black community known by native blacks as Skidmore lands that was once part of the Holly Beach Farms and Whitehall Farms that still exist to this day. The Broadneck Church was a centerpiece for worship for the Skidmore blacks, now known as Asbury Broadneck United Methodist Church. Church records go back as far as 1842. It It all started on January 11, 1956. A baby boy was born by a young mother from a small village area called Skidmore, a very rural area outside of Annapolis City on the Broad Neck Peninsula near the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Days later, she would bring her firstborn home to her first home as a recent newlywed and mother. Her new home was a small used trailer on her dad's property along a gravel road connected to Yorktown Road in Skidmore. Soon to be called Beanie, from his early childhood, he would learn the history of Skidmore and his family he was born into. It all started in the 18th century with ships docked in Annapolis with slaves brought in first by the governor of the Maryland colony and then later by his friend John Rideout, owners of the Whitehall Farm Plantation Estate. Years later, one former slave female gave birth to a baby girl named Lily Johnson, who was white as snow, on December 5th, 1879, in Skidmore. It was always rumored that her actual father was one of the white men from the Rideout family. Eventually, they would grow up and marry a young black man named George H. Hayes, another Rideout plantation slave descendant who was born on June 9, 1872. Lily would spend the rest of her life doing domestic housework for white families and having 14 children along with her husband George as a farmer on tracts of land given to them by the Rideout family and the Johnson family. One of Lily and George's children was named Kermit S. Hayes, born on December 19, 1904. Years later, Kermit would grow up and meet Annie P. Cisco from Annapolis. He was born on October 6, 1912, and married on July 25, 1928. They would eventually have and raise 8 children and build a home on tracts of land handed down from Kermit's parents. All the children would receive their early education in a two-room Skidmore schoolhouse for blacks. Annie was strict with her children's upbringing while Kermit worked at farming at the ferry boat and at the Sandy Point State Park and building the first Chesapeake Bay Bridge. Kermit was also an active member of the Broadneck Methodist Church, a community center piece for the Skidmore blacks and other neighboring black communities for over a century. One of Kermit's and Annie's children was named Rosemarie, born April 14, 1936, in the house of her parents. Rosemarie would grow up to be a beautiful woman with a heart of God's goodness. At 19, she married Bernard Wallace on June 26, 1955, at the Broadneck Church. The reception was held at the parents' home with both her parents and family around. Bernard was an Annapolis City resident born December 30th, 1926. He received his grade school education at the St. Mary's Catholic Church. A limited number of black students were allowed back then. But secondary Catholic school education was off limits to blacks, so he attended the now historic-based high school, the only high school for all the blacks in Anne Arundel County. He was a gifted artist and musician. He did the graphic designs and drawing for his high school graduating yearbook. He would later spend the rest of his life working on the Naval Academy grounds maintenance crew until retirement, and other second jobs doing janitorial work, working part-time at the Giant Store in Pearl, Annapolis. In his early years, Bernard's parents, Martha and James Wallace, worked as a maid and a butler and chauffeur for one of the Navy's admirals living along the Severn River. Rosemarie would spend the rest of her life as a homemaker and raising 4 children. In her early years, she would occasionally do domestic housework for the white families in the Broadneck area. Rosemarie would pass in July 2008, followed by her husband Bernard Wallace Sr. in April 2012.